what you need, but I never met a woman with so much green. Hey mama, hey mama, hey. Hey mama, I've seen you around, messing with all the poor boys in this town. Hey mama, hey mama, hey. You burn this whole place down just to wear the crown.
But what have you actually done to hold yourself accountable? Have you resigned as CEO or chairman of Wells Fargo?
The board, I serve at
Have you resigned?
No, I've not.
Have you returned one nickel of the millions of dollars that you were paid while this scam was going on?
The board will take care of that.
Have you returned one nickel of the money you earned while this scam was going on?
And the board will do...
I will take that as a no then. I'm not asking about regional managers. I'm not asking about branch managers. I'm asking if you have fired senior management, the people who actually led community banking division, who oversaw this fraud, or the compliance division that was in charge of making sure that the bank complied with the law.
Carrie Toll said...
Did you fire
No.
any of those people? No. Okay. So you haven't resigned. You haven't returned a single nickel of your personal earnings. You haven't fired a single senior executive. Instead, evidently, your definition of accountable is to push the blame to your low-level employees who don't have the money for a fancy PR firm to defend themselves. It's gutless leadership. You know, here's what really gets me about this, Mr. Stump. If one of your tellers took a handful of $20 bills out of the cash drawer, they'd probably be looking at criminal charges for theft. They could end up in prison. But you squeezed your employees to the breaking point so they would cheat customers and you could drive up the value of your stock and put hundreds of millions of dollars in your own pocket. And when it all blew up, you kept your job, you kept your multi-million-dollar bonuses, and you went on television to blame thousands of $12 an hour employees who were just trying to meet cross-sell quotas that made you rich. This is about accountability. You should resign. You should give back the money that you took while this scam was going on, and you should be criminally investigated by both the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission. You know, this just isn't right.
Hello humans, welcome back to the Slackline Quote of the Day broadcast. You are here with the boss.
The boss is coming! That's a made up dumb fairy tale name, you
And that was Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, I believe. United States Senator Elizabeth Warren bringing us in to the show with her dressing down of Wells Fargo CEO John Stumpf from 2015. It's one of my favorite little excerpts of hers, and kind of goes along with our quote today. And that quote is brought to us today by Durden's Van Rentals, preloaded with explosives to make your financial revolution as exciting and as bright as possible. Those are Durden's Van Rentals, bringing us our quote today from one Senator Elizabeth Warren. The total amount of money that Wall Street handed out in bonuses last year was double the total income of all full-time minimum wage workers. That's obscene. That is Elizabeth Warren posted to her own Facebook in 2015. Elizabeth Warren is one of my favorite people in the entire world, I think. I really think she should be president of the United States. She didn't end up running last year, which I thought was kind of crazy, because she's very, very popular, I think, and she's smart as a whip. She's got her values aligned properly. Actually, it was really I knew I wanted to use an Elizabeth Warren quote today, but I had a really tough time picking from a bank of hers. I was trying to find one that was pretty contemporary and relevant actually within the last little while, but this one, it kind of went along with this little video that I wanted to share, a little audio clip. You can find the full video on YouTube if you just Google Wells Fargo Elizabeth Warren. If you Google Elizabeth Warren, you can find her doing that to pretty much anybody that comes in to sit before Congress and get and testify like that. But yeah, she's one of my favorite people. But yeah, I honestly think that she didn't run for president from pressure inside the Democratic Party that wanted Hillary Clinton to. I think that she had this kind of complex of being the first U.S. woman president. Like that was somehow Hillary Clinton's like birthright or something like that. It's all just baseless speculation, but that's what I think, and I have the microphone. So, but yeah, I went back and I kind of did a little research on. Actually, I'd been kind of doing accidental research on just kind of history and specifically U.S. history and history of the last 100 years or so. I wanted to kind of look at kind of the historical context of banking and what's been going on and kind of the cyclical nature of these booms and crises that have happened throughout history that I don't really see why we haven't learned from. It seems like people like Elizabeth Warren and people that are in other fields of influence see these things, but for some reason people that hold backwards ideas end up getting further with their policies. I'm not really sure why. And when you start to look into these things, it's kind of almost hilarious how obvious the cycles are. If you go back to like kind of just as industrialization was happening, and kind of the first real economic boom of monetization and money and trade came kind of in the 1920s and what's called the Roaring Twenties. And there's so many parallels of things that of things that people were arguing for and that went on. Mass deregulation. I mean, there wasn't really any regulation. Like there was no real precedent for some of the stuff that was coming up, like oil industries and railways and all that type of thing. Basically, well, I mean, railways were old by this point, but like, automobiles, basically like all this type of mechanization that was making lives easier was coming up, and there was no real actual regulation for industry because there was no real like, mass industry like that before. So they went with what's called laissez-faire capitalism. It's kind of just like let business do their thing and the invisible hand can all figure it out. And low taxes on business and income. This is kind of, it's still out of the American way of like low government interference, weakening of unions. There was lots of government corruption, and it was really great for the economy and for people in the short run, or at least like some people. Like real wages grew, but corporate profits grew at double the pace, and they still haven't kept up with that, and in fact it's gotten way worse. Revolutions in technology made modern life like way easier, and entertainment and sports and movies and stuff like that grew, but like it became commonplace to use credit to get this type of stuff, to go into debt to kind of preserve like an American way of life, or whatever freedom was like envision to you. Things like layaway shopping and that type of thing like just started to pop up in this time. And by the end of 1929, top 5% of a share of income exceeded the bottom 60%, which would actually look like really great today when you consider it in contrast of the quote that we heard. And also, surprise, surprise, there's rise of KKK. In fact, there's like 3 million members of the KKK by 1930, out of rise of nationalism from World War I, and threats from immigrants coming into the country, Irish and Jewish and all kinds of different types of immigrants coming into America. And so there's a big movement towards discrimination and anti-immigration. And of course, what followed the Roaring '20s was the '30s, the Dirty '30s, the Great Depression, massive unemployment, and industrialization had made independent farming and stuff like that sort of obsolete. And people had to move into cities to work in factories to make real wages to participate in this type of economy. And there just wasn't those many jobs, and so it was just massive unemployment and not very much fun for anybody. And then if you go to like fast forward to Reagan, the deity that all conservatives have these days, it has a lot of parallels. United forces of conservatism, people against welfare state, and like a white backlash resulting from increased opportunity for African Americans from the civil rights movements and that type of thing. And like really pro-military expansion, put through legislation to try to like get rid of unions or like curtail their power, reduce regulation across all industries and banking, like lowered taxes for everybody from the highest bracket at 70% to the highest bracket at 50%, and then again to like 28%. Like that's fucking huge reduction. And the economy did expand. The stock market boomed, but again, like wages didn't rise, and they haven't really risen at the same pace since. And that's why we have this growing wealth gap of inequality, and this deregulation that happened caused like this big boom in Wall Street and banking and whatnot. And then we ended up eventually with what culminated in the 2008 crisis of just like this huge bubble of debt that as soon as a few loans went bad, nobody could really pay back, and all these people end up losing their homes and that type of thing. And then, these guys that Elizabeth Warren was talking to at the beginning of the episode, walk away from it, dusting their hands with hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. And now, not only that, I mean, you have, again, this pushback of conservatism and rise of nationalism and deregulation and claims of economic boom when it's really just like numbers of GDP, which are not necessarily good measures of what people's actual day-to-day life are. And you see it here again. I mean, this spiel is from not even 7-8 years later, and after the crisis happened and the banks are defrauding people in a totally different way by force feeding them a bunch of accounts with a bunch of fees that they don't need, and saying that it's part of like customer relations or building relationships with customers, some foundational bullshit like that. And we end up with these basically massive fraud schemes that have little to no oversight. I mean, it's not as bad here in Canada. The Canadian bank system is like very highly regulated, but all of these things are so intertwined and international that it all meshes now. There's all these banks, international banks, have merging interests all over the place, and so the idea of like a Canadian bank or a U.S. bank or a Swiss bank or Cayman bank or whatever, I mean, their interests are to money, obviously. I mean, that's what their business is, and that's fine, but when that is your business's only interest, and you only see people as this thing to squeeze money out of, you get these predatory practices that prey on people that don't understand what is a very, very complicated system. It's purposely almost unexplainable, to the point where you can just be like, oh, just trust me, I'm an advisor, just trust me. I know about derivatives, and I know about mortgage-backed securities, and I know about whatever fucking fees that these banks are putting together. Like, those are our fees, and that's what they're there for a reason, because there's this work that goes on behind the scenes and all of that. Like, it gets a little frustrating to, well, for one thing, to participate in, as I used to do as an employee of a bank, and two, to have to participate in as a customer, when, like, this is really the only way that you can kind of operate. It's the only way that you can get credit and loans and go to school and purchase homes and that type of thing. Like, it's literally the only way, and so you have to deal with these institutions. And so when something becomes a necessity like that, it requires, in my opinion, like, pretty heavy regulation as far as how they deal with the public, because they are a public good versus what is an industry. Like, a bank is just as much of a utility as water and as gas, and I would argue that internet is the same way. And there are a bunch of services that have popped up for the last banking is not new, but it's become much more integral part of our lives that we don't really realize, as things have moved so quickly, and generations get so used to how things are within their time frame. We kind of get lost on how things were before, and people don't realize how quickly that these things have gone, and that our grandparents would have like no concept of how we live today, and how cities are built, and how we communicate and how we do business and stuff like that. Like, it's totally foreign to them, and that's kind of an interesting thought to think about, how, like, if it's changed that quickly and that drastically over the last 100 years from 1920 until now, and our technology has allowed us to change things now even more quickly, talk to each other more rapidly, do business more rapidly, trade stocks more rapidly, all this type of stuff. And thus, we're not reading the fine print in anything, because everything has to be so instant. How quickly can this spin out of control? People talk about, like, doomsday theories like they're not a plausible thing, but it's not like devastating things haven't happened to humanity by humanity before. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be on purpose. Like, I'm not saying that people are out to destroy the world, but we are kind of slowly destroying what we're building, or what we've built in the past, by just allowing these things to kind of run out of control. So maybe that's where we'll leave it for today. That quote again from Senator Elizabeth Warren in the United States. The total amount of money that Wall Street handed out in bonuses last year was double the total income of all full-time minimum wage workers. That's obscene. That is Senator Elizabeth Warren from the state of Massachusetts in the United States. That's from 2015 Facebook post that she made. And that quote today brought to us again by Durden's Van Rentals, preloaded with explosives to make your financial revolution as exciting and as bright as possible. Those are Durden's Van Rentals. I met the owner of that, Ty Durden. He's very interested in taking the system down. So if you're on board with that, I recommend checking out Durden's Van Rentals. This has been Slackline Quote of the Day. Thank you once again to Crooked Spies for providing their music to us today. Follow the Slackline on Instagram at the.slack.line, on Twitter at slackline_radio, on YouTube and iTunes at the Slackline Podcast. You have been listening to The Boss.
The boss is coming! That's a made-up dumb fairy tale name, you.
Thanks to anybody who's been listening. Hope you all have a good day. Happy Monday, happy week. We'll see you again tomorrow.